What's with all these badass women in movies and TV who still need to be rescued by men? Or the ones who can defeat armies of muscle-bound henchmen bare-handed, but have to do it in skin-tight suits and high heels? And what's up with those badass women who never wanted or needed a man until our suave hero sexed her up, and then she dies? Welcome to the Outrider Podcast's 7-part series, Problematic Badass Female Tropes. I'm your host, Jason Quinn Malott, and I'll be talking with the writer, performer, and all-around badass who identified these tropes, my friend Jenn Zuko. So strap on some pasties and a merkin, and let's do this thing. Welcome to the Outrider Podcast. I, of course, am Jason Quinn Malott, and I'm here with my friend Jenn Zuko from graduate school, and we're going to be talking about her 7-part series of articles that she wrote for writershq.co.uk called Problematic Badass Female Tropes. It's about all the horrible things we do to women in stories.
Woot, as they say online.
I am tempted to title the podcast series Problematic Badass Lady Parts.
Oh my God, you totally should. That'd be awesome.
So
problematic
tonight,
lady parts. We have Planned Parenthood for that for now.
So tonight, well, it is going to be night every time we do that. We sit down to do this, but
right.
People will be listening whenever the hell they feel like it. So this time,
they should.
I know.
Right?
So for this first one, we're discussing what you have dubbed the Marion effect.
The Marion effect.
Right. So would you like to give our listeners a rundown of the Marion effect?
I would like to give our listeners a rundown of the whole shebang, like the whole enchilada idea first. Is that cool?
Sure.
Because like so many of us, especially in the sort of reverberating waves of Me Too, are talking about this sort of thing. Uh-huh. I wanted to distinguish my 7 tropes from other amazing feminist scholars who are talking about all kinds of misogyny. Uh-huh. So like as we're all sort of discussing now, there's this ingrained so much as to be insidious, systematic misogyny. That's a good tongue twister.
Yes, it is.
That makes my lady parts problematic. Anyway, but I mean, people are talking about this all the time, and there's all kinds of sort of misogynistic tropes. Like there's a damsel in distress, mm-hmm. There's the Mary Sue, there's the manic pixie dream girl, and so many people are talking about that. But what I wanted to do was talk about, in particular, badass female characters, because that's more distinguished than, like, a damsel in distress is really super easy to spot, especially these days when we're all kind of talking about it. Mm-hmm. But when it's a badass female character, it's almost like a bait and switch kind of situation where you're presented with this really super strong character and you're amazing and all that stuff. But then, like, when you look at it, you're like, actually, if you look closely, she's really not badass at all. She's really subservient to the male hero, or mm-hmm. Has sexuality shoehorned onto her, all this stuff that we're going to be talking about with these 7 series. But other scholars, like, I mean, just look at Anita Sarkeesian if you want to learn about the damsel in distress in video games. She does a really good job. So I'm not talking about feminist calling out tropes in general. I'm talking about calling out misogyny that's insidiously within the structure of particularly badass characters, because again, that's a lot harder to notice. Right. It's kind of sneaky misogyny. It's sneaky misogyny.
It's similar to benevolent misogyny, which is like, oh yes, women can do whatever they want. They just need dudes' help.
Exactly. And that's kind of one of them too. And also I wanted to make this caveat as well. I'm not calling these inherent misogynist structures of character out to make all of you hate all of them. Right. You shouldn't. You should still love all of them. I mean, go ahead and love your Wonder Woman. It's all great. I happen to adore James Bond, and I'm sorry. You know what? I'm not sorry. # sorry, not sorry. I love James Bond. But I can at least be aware of the problems that are inherent with these characters. Like, you can still love these characters, but just don't be spoon-fed the misogyny. Right. Like, understand, don't swallow the misogyny like you're.
Don't allow yourself to be brainwashed by it.
Yeah, exactly. Just know what you're watching. And also, this is good for people who are helping younger people who have developing social structures. They don't know how they are supposed to be socially, or they're just discovering that, and their brains are still developing. So when young girls and boys and developing. I know mine is too. Every moment. Speaking of that, I'm gonna have a sip of wine. But I mean, when young girls and boys and non-binaries are growing up and trying to figure out where they fit into the world, and they just get spoon-fed these characters without any kind of discussion. They just get this insidious misogyny that's almost like normalized, or almost like you don't notice it.
Right.
It's so normal. So that's what I want to do with these 7 tropes. They're particularly about badass characters, not about other kinds of female characters. Anyway, that's my long-winded thing.
Yep. Well, that's the thing about the tropes, and I know we'll talk about it eventually later, is the whole point about representation. You can grow up and not see anything. This is kind of why when Black Panther came out, I was just nearly in tears, because I was like, here's a role model for all of those kids of color that I grew up with who had to like the same white superheroes that I liked and didn't have their own, and here's this big, huge, epic superhero that's theirs. And the thing that kind of tickled me was that having been a straight white male who grew up with a lot of straight white male superheroes, I realized at some point that it had kind of indoctrinated into me this idea that I had to save the world, because I looked like all the other superheroes.
Well, and there's other stuff that gets indoctrinated too. Not only just like I have to save the world, but things like, what's the one sentence pitch sentence for a rom-com? Boy gets girl. Right. Think about how much of a problem that fucking sentence is. Oh, can I say fucking?
Yeah, it's my fucking podcast. Fucking, you can say fucking whenever you fucking want to. But the point was, my thing was when now it's not like we haven't had female superheroes or strong or female heroines make their way into the movies. But part of the reason that Wonder Woman and Black Panther and getting these superheroes out there was, like I said, I had grown up, thinking that it was my job to be a superhero, to save the world. And when Black Panther showed up, when Wonder Woman showed up, I was like, oh my God, reinforcements are here.
Thank God. Yeah.
I'm not the only one tasked with saving the world anymore.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, that indoctrinated is a really strong word. I think that's really true. Like, it's just this whole the social interactions we learn, we get from our culture. Yeah. And so to be able to call out these problems is not to make us hate our entertainment, but it's to make us go, okay, you know what? Right. There are some problems here. And so now I know what they are. And knowing is half the battle. I also used to watch G.I. Joe. And I love
still watch G.I. Joe cartoons on Saturday mornings.
Oh God, we are old, aren't we? Love that stuff. He-Man. Oh God, so good. So good. So I started this discussion when I was musing about 2 particular characters named Marion, which is why my first trope is called the Marion effect. Right. It happens all over the place, but I was musing about these 2 characters in particular, and I was having this discussion with my significant other, and suddenly it just bloomed into this whole, oh my God, problematic badass female tropes. So because I'm a badass female in my own real life, and I'm realizing how that sort of hidden misogyny has affected me in my real life. So the Marion effect started out with these 2 characters named Marion. So okay, go ahead.
Well, but before we get into Marion, yet again, let's sidetrack. And for those who
it's Jason and me talking over beer and wine. Better all strap in. It's going to be a really exciting couple of hours. Well, we'll try. Know what it's like.
We'll try to keep it to 1 hour. Otherwise, everybody will pass out around us. But
our listeners are going to turn into Kevin. Right.
So before we get too far into Marion here, let's and for the sake of those who have not heard previous shows where you and I talked, let's give them a quick little bio as to what makes you a badass, because I know, but they don't.
They don't. They may not. So I am right now, I do a lot of different things. I am making a career transition from academia into the corporate world, where I'm going to bring my body language consulting expertise. I'm a martial artist as far as my background goes. I've been doing stage combat and stunt coordination for almost 2 decades now. Yeah. Oh, excuse me while I pluck a gray hair out of my head. So I do stunt coordination, stage combat, martial arts, and I've been doing lots of intimacy coordination these days too. And I've been, for the past couple of years, also getting into the burlesque and variety show scene.
Right on.
So, and just growing up learning the fields, the art forms of stage, couple, theatrical combat and real combat martial arts. Very, very, very boys club, like super boys club. So, and it still is to a big extent, not completely like it was back in the 90s when I was doing it, but so that's my particular brand of badassery. I'm kind of a real life badass.
Right. And a poet and a novelist.
Yes, I'm a writer. Yeah.
And all that good stuff.
So I wanted to write about these things because I wanted to call them out and help people, especially people like me who are continuing to create stories, to help them to just be like, oh, that's kind of shitty. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So actually I got a message recently from a friend who I had gone to theater school with back at CU Boulder. She's a filmmaker now, and she told me she uses the articles every day in her work. And she told me she shared some of the articles with a filmmaker friend of hers who had some problematic tropes in some of his characters. He was a screenwriter. Right. And she's like, I just gave these to him, and it's so, I mean, this is really, this is already helping a lot of people. I know, I got all like super big headed. So, so that's why I wanted to write these and share them. Writers HQ is a website for and by writers. Yep. So I'm hoping that like all the writers that see them on that website are able to use them too. So
excellent.
So yeah, and my significant other also says that this is going to turn into a book, and I'm like, God damn it. But anyway, so that's the main thing. I have another fun thing about Writers HQ being a British website and my struggle with British spelling. They're very cute. I call them my Brititors. They're adorable.
Excellent.
I'm like, okay, you know what? I'll replace my Z's with S's. That's no problem. I have no problem with that at all. But you can pry, what did it say? You can pry aluminum from my cold, dead Yankee hands. I'm like, why do you need to add so many more vowels? Are you traumatized by Welsh? Is that what it is?
I like all the vowels. But
I'm like, it's not aluminium. Anyway, so that's just a side note. You can edit that out.
Nope, that's fine.
So the Marion effect was the first thing that I was thinking about, which just made all of them come tumbling out after. I was musing about these two characters, and this is what started the entire thing. So I was thinking about these two things. And actually, when I was young, when these two movies came out, I was really young, and I was very impressionable, and I was trying to become a badass myself.
Right.
And it always bugged me. These two characters, their arc, it's not their story, of course. It's the male hero story, duh.
Right.
But, which is another thing. But, it always bugged me. So the first Marion that I talk about in this article is Maid Marion from the so terrible, it's fantastic, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Kevin Costner.
Oh, yes. Where Robin Hood actually came from Texas somehow.
God, it's so bad. It's great. It's so, I mean, God.
But it does have the wonderful Alan Rickman.
God bless. So good. So
cut his heart out with a spoon.
Like,
because it'll hurt more.
As a trained actor, I'm just like, did no one give him any direct? They're just like, go for it. Make it as big as humanly. No, actually, make it bigger than humanly possible. Yeah. No one told him to pull it back. Nobody. It is glorious. But anyway, so when we first meet Maid Marion in this movie, you may recall, she's masked, so we don't know it's a she, and she like has this amazing fight scene. Like she has this like anachronistic ninja suit on, basically, which is completely wrong for the time period, but whatever, we don't care. They all had 90s scarves and mullets and shit anyway. And she kicks Robin Hood's ass. She kicks Robin Hood's ass. I mean, we all know Robin Hood. Robin Hood's a hero. Yeah, sure, he's an archer, but, he's a badass. She kicks his ass.
He made it through the crusade.
She kicks his nuts, actually. But
Yep.
So, I mean, we're like, wow, that's amazing. That's so cool. After that, directly after that fight scene, she turns into completely useless. There is she's so useless. She can't fight back when the henchmen attack her on the horses.
Uh-huh.
She can't she gets dragged up a tower by one wrist by this scrawny sheriff of Nottingham. Like, what? There's an old witch, there's a fat priest, and there's this dude who's like half your size. How are you not? What happened to your badass skills? What happened to all the fighting?
I know.
Did you just forget how to fight? Was the fight was it like a superhero suit where all the fight is in the suit? Like, what happened?
Well, the dress is restrictive, I mean.
Yeah, but sure. But even then, you could at least do. I know. I've fought in dresses before. I have fought in dresses with multi-layered skirts, and I've fought in corsets before. You can do shit.
Yep.
You can't do everything you could do in the anachronistic suit, but you can do some things. You can at least do something. I mean, aren't you armed anymore? Like, what? You just met the male hero, and now suddenly you are unarmed. And you are completely useless, and you've forgotten completely how to fight. Like, what? Why? And my young self, that came out in 91, kids. So I was just graduating high school in 91. And I was like, what? Why? And then even there's the point where there's the big, Robin Hood versus Sheriff of Nottingham sword fight scene at the very end. Even then, she's standing there doing nothing. Like, what? All you can do is go, Robin, look out. Like, really?
Yeah.
What happened? What happened between that first scene? Oh, well, the male hero came on the scene. That's what happened. Of course, that's what happened. So then I was thinking, oh shit. Well, that's really shitty. I mean, so she's only badass because of a flavor. She's only a badass so that we can understand why he would fall in love with her. Right. But it's not real because she can do nothing to save herself. The second Marion, because I'm like, okay, you know what? Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves is a really bad movie, so that's okay. Yeah. But in Raiders of the Lost Ark, that's the second Marion that I was talking about. And Marion Ravenwood is not a fist fighter. She's not like a warrior type the way we are fooled into believing the way Marion was. But she's a total bad. Like we get introduced to her. She is badass. She drinks these guys under the table. She's not even tipsy. She's like us talking in grad school over pitchers of beer. She's totally badass. She owns her tavern. I mean, sure, she inherited it from her father. We get the idea, but still, I mean, she is a badass. She owns her tavern. She can drink anyone under the table. When she has the big fight with Indy and her against the Nazis in the tavern. By the way, I'm going to talk about spoilers, but these are really old movies, so
if people haven't seen them yet, it's probably because they're young and they'll get over it.
Whatever, it's a spoiler.
Ageist asshole.
Yeah, kids these days. While you're at it, get off my lawn. But during that big fight scene, she's not actually fighting because she's not a fighter, but Indy's a fighter, but she totally has his back. He's like, give me that bottle of liquor. Okay. And it's her sharp shooting and sharp eye and cool head under pressure that actually saves Indy. He would have gotten shot at the end if it weren't for her.
And the extra dose of alcohol.
That's right. But she was not fighting, but she was totally backing up Indy in a really strong way. Which is totally appropriate for her character, right? And at the end, she goes, I'm a goddamn partner! And then cut to the next scene, and she fucking isn't. And also, you noticed how both of these characters, their hair style changes, what they're wearing changes. By the time Marion Ravenwood becomes the damsel in distress, this is what the flip happens. So she starts off as a badass, turns into a damsel in distress once the hero arrives. So we first see Marion Ravenwood. She's wearing earth tones. She's wearing pants. She has her hair up. She's sweaty. She's, as you would be. By the time she becomes the damsel in distress, she is literally wearing a white dress. Right. Like she's a bride, and she's wearing high heels. And, to give Marion Ravenwood a little credit, she does try to get away from Belloc by using her drinking skills and her wit, but it doesn't work.
Right.
Because that's not what she is anymore. Now her only function is to be the second MacGuffin that Indy has to save.
Right.
He now has to save her and the MacGuffin, not necessarily in that order.
Right. Now, see, I did not rewatch Robin Hood.
You don't know.
I was a little bit distracted by a lot of other things going on in my life, but I did over Christmas rewatch, over the New Year's thing when my sister was here, rewatch Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh yeah.
Right. Love that movie. Now,
love it too. Love it.
But the thing is, though, is that my one thing, and I agree with you that Marion has some problems in Raiders, but whereas in Robin Hood it's an on-off switch.
Right. Yes.
In Raiders, it's not that black and white.
Yeah.
Because when they get to Cairo, she's still
gradual.
in pants, but it's flouncy pants.
Her hair is down.
Her hair is down, but she still fights. And the only reason she gets caught is because she makes a bad decision, not because she did not fight back.
Right,
she made
exactly.
a bad decision to hide in the basket, and they were like, "Oh, the monkey caught her." But that's
right.
But prior to that, she did punch out somebody. She hit somebody with the frying pan. She
totally.
She stood her ground, and the only thing that caught her was she made a bad decision, which Indiana Jones also made at various times.
It's a more gradual transition with Marion Ravenwood. Yeah, it's not like you said. It's not a switch that gets flipped.
Right.
It's still a flip, but it's a gradual transition. And you can see that, like you just said, in the outfits that she wears when we first meet her, compared to when she's in Morocco, compared to when she's in Belloc's captivity. It's you can see the sort of timeline of damsel in distressness that happens. Yeah, and that's definitely well said. I think in the article too, I point that out. It's like, now it's obvious in Robin Hood. It's like, what the fuck? Really? What just happened? But in Indiana Jones, it's like you don't really go, what the fuck? You actually just go, there's something just niggles at me. Like I'm not sure what is bothering me, but something's bothering me. That's how I felt about Indiana Jones. So that's why I put those two together, because it's like, okay, you can see the obvious thing, but then look at how it's totally within the structures of this character, within this story. It's hard to notice. It really is hard to notice until you call it out. So yeah, that's one of the ones that's way more subtle. And, by the end, she's like, does not. I mean, she's literally another thing for Indy to get away from the Nazis.
Yeah. But, I mean, you should always rescue the woman from the Nazis. I mean, that's just kind of the rule. Yes. But she does nothing. Her role completely changes, in other words. Like, it begins with, I'm your goddamn partner, and it ends with, Indy! Like... Mario. Right. So now here's an interesting question. Maybe it's not that interesting. I don't know. I'm assuming too much.
Well, I'll try and have an interesting answer at least.
But what if? Now it's been a while, and I almost rewatched this as well, because Marion reappears in the same, character.
Oh, you're talking about the fourth movie?
Yeah, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
La 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 la. There's no fourth movie. La 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 la. Indiana Jones is a trilogy. La la la. I can't hear you.
No. I don't know why people disliked that movie so much.
Well, I tried watching it, and what I didn't like was it sort of was. It was mean-spirited, unlike the other three.
How so?
I can't put my finger on it. You're gonna have to make me watch it again, and I'm gonna hate you forever if you make me do that. It was a sort of, well, for one thing, the fight scenes and the action and the storyline itself is very video game and not nearly so grounded in reality. Even though there's obviously supernatural elements to all three of the movies. Right. There's a supernatural thing that you're rescuing. That's what the MacGuffin is you're rescuing a magical artifact.
Right.
But there's still a lot more grounding in reality in the first three movies, just in the movements of everybody, in the action scenes. Of course, a lot of the stunts were practical stunts too. That adds to it. And there's this kind of, I don't know how to put it. yes, we're always punching Nazis. Yes, we're always fighting bad guys. Yes, Indiana Jones is a sort of a horn dog problematic character himself, but there's this kind of joy in the first three.
Right.
And it's just really cynical and mean. And
do you think maybe it has something to do with the Cold War aspect to it?
Maybe that's it. Maybe it's not like, yeah, yay, let's punch out Nazis. We can all agree on that. It's more like, yeah, I don't know. And I don't know about the whole like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know why the whole alien thing should be any different than the whole like Ark of the Covenant thing.
Right.
There really isn't necessarily anything wrong about the one versus the other, but
right.
I don't know. There's just
I thought I would bring it up because she does have a second act of
she does.
Unlike Maid Marion from the Robin Hood movie, Marion Ravenwood has a second act.
And that's really rare. And that's really rare for also a young badass female character to reappear as the same character as someone older.
Right. And
that's pretty rare.
And she doesn't need to be rescued this time in the second one, does she?
I don't know.
We'll have to watch it again.
God damn it. I don't want to watch the fucking Crystal Skull. Research, right?
Aren't they making another one?
Yeah, I think so. Are they doing it with Harrison Ford?
I think so.
Good Lord. And at the moment, I can't think of other Marion characters. A lot of these characters, too. I mean, like we're noticing just with the two that I bring up in my article, there's a lot of different characters that have this happen to them, where it's like there are some female badass characters that actually, they're nearly just fine.
Right.
There's just this little porcupine spine of, God, why do you have to be subservient to the man right now? Like, why? It was so good until then.
Yeah.
And it is still good. Like, I'm thinking Imperator Furiosa in particular from Mad Max.
Mm-hmm.
I think she has a couple of little threads of a couple of these tropes, but the one thing I was thinking in particular was that throughout most of the movie, spoilers, kids.
Right.
Throughout most of the movie, she's the leader. And she's the one who came up with the scheme. She's the one who is like the main like strength and backbone and the brains and the brawn of the whole operation. But once they get to the island of misfit toys, island of women or whatever the country, they get to the island of misfit toys, and she realizes, oh shit, this is not the saving grace that I thought it was. Right after that happens, she becomes the follower.
Right.
And then suddenly Max is the leader to bring them back to where they need to be. And then she becomes the follower. So that's not necessarily a bad thing because that makes sense within the arc of the plot. It makes, you could argue that that's actually fine, but that is actually a manifestation of the Marion effect. She is the total badass. She is the leader. She is the one. And then suddenly she's like, okay, I'll follow you, Max. Right. What do you want me? What should we do next?
But that seems almost at that point, even though I think the only probably thing that saves it from really being the Marion effect is that she is a badass within the confines of the tribe that she's a part of.
Right.
And she makes this plan to extricate herself and these women from that situation.
Right.
But it's almost like she gets to a point, and because she was so enmeshed in the tribe, she does not have the experience or the capacity to make the
she does it out of
leap.
necessity.
The leap into it, and she needs someone as crazy and alone and isolated as Max.
Right.
To make so even
exactly.
though
and she doesn't become a damsel in distress either.
Right.
That's another major variation on it. She doesn't actually become a damsel in distress, but she does become a follower.
Right.
But it's out of necessity. It's out of total necessity. She has to now. She has no idea what to do next.
Right.
Which is totally legit.
And they could not have, and even with Max leading, they could not have made that final leap without her.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So she doesn't lose her badassness.
Right. And he doesn't have to rescue her.
Right.
he's rescuing all of them, including himself, and she's right there alongside of him. She doesn't
Mm-hmm.
lose her ability to win a fight.
She doesn't yeah, exactly. She doesn't forget all of her warrior skills for some bizarre reason. So you see what I'm saying? Like this, like you could talk about other characters. There are other characters that do this in an okay way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just important to kind of look at, what are our structures of gender and, male domination and stuff like that. But
right.
I like to bring her up when I talk about Marion effect, because it's like, well, this is actually maybe almost an example of something that happens like this, but that isn't a problem.
Right.
Necessarily, or isn't a bad problem like these are.
So where would, or do we get to this, or would this fit in later on? Where would I'm trying to think of how best to describe her.
Oh.
The teenage boy wet dream badass fantasy of Lara Croft. Where would she fit in? Does she fit in any of these tropes?
Yeah, I would call her part of the second one, which is the Wonder Woman.
Okay, so we'll get to that next week. But
yeah, remind me of her though. Which is funny because I was just looking on Twitter today and I saw this beautiful love story between Wonder Woman and Lara Croft, and it was this beautifully illustrated few comic pages.
Right.
It was gorgeous and delicious. Oh my god. Anyway, yeah, I would say Lara Croft. So because the Wonder Woman, that's the second trope. We'll talk about that next time.
Mm-hmm.
That's about a warrior woman with sexuality either shoehorned onto her, like sexiness. I mean, not sexuality,
right.
But sexiness being shoehorned onto her or completely extracted from her in order for her to be worth being a character. So I would call Lara Croft that, especially her old iteration in the first video games.
Yep.
But yeah, I can't think of any other Marion effect. Can you think of any Marion effect characters that are in literature?
No, that's what I've been pondering, for the couple weeks since we set the date on this. And yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of a challenge to really think of it, because it does because it ends up in the damsel in distress trope.
Yeah, the whole she starts off as strong and then ends up being completely
right, and depending on how fast or how weakly that badassery is established.
Mm-hmm.
It really kind of overtakes it. So if they do a poor job of establishing the woman as a badass, then all you remember is the damsel in distress.
Right.
You don't remember the transition, and that's been the hardest thing that I've been trying to wrestle with when trying to think of other situations where it happens like this.
And that's part of the bait and switch aspect of it too. Like what you're saying is exactly what that effect of these tropes is. Like, oh, well, if it switches too quickly or too severely, or we don't get her badassery strongly enough, then yeah, we do kind of forget that she was strong. Or it's the other way around, where it's like Marion in Indiana Jones. It's like, well, we almost forget that she becomes a damsel in distress because she's so cool in the beginning, and that's kind of what sticks. And then we go, oh wait, I totally forgot. She is a total Princess Peach, at the end, right. and really, and it's almost like you forget that part too. Mm-hmm. It's almost like we're being cajoled into not noticing, which I don't think. I mean, honestly, I think this happens for two reasons. Right. This whole the bait and switch thing for all of the 7 tropes. I think it happens on the one hand, especially in Hollywood, where we've been learning what a toxic sort of environment that has been, where it's it is actually on purpose, where it's actually malicious. Like, okay, let's just give her something cool to do so that the bitches don't bitch at us. All right, so just give her an awesome fight scene, and then let's fucking forget about it. Literally, I would not put it past some of the creators in Hollywood to actually literally be saying that. Mm-hmm. But I think that's not usually the case. Most of the time, I would say it's actually people who really don't get it. There is a sort of a minor controversy recently about the Deadpool one of the Deadpool trailers or one of the Deadpool movies, and I haven't seen them. But there was one thing about how, no, I know, I need to be reading him and seeing him, right? Mr. Fourth Wall Breaker.
Yeah.
Mr. Snark.
Right.
Snark
No.
Hero.
Yeah. What happened?
But there was a whole thing about like
they fridged his love interest.
They fridged her, and just Google fridging, kids. It's a problematic misogynist trope. So they fridged her, and then the creators were like, "What? Is that a thing?" Like they had no idea. They literally just did not know. And I think that's mostly what happens. It's that misogyny is so ingrained in our less sort of rape culture that we just kind of don't notice most of the time, which is really kind of, this is why I wrote these articles, because it's like, hey, look, don't hate it. It's okay. It's okay. But did you know that you were doing that?
Right.
So
for those who are listening and don't want to go take the time to look it up real quick, fridging is the trope where the hero's love interest is killed early on in the story, and that's the thing that triggers his emotional and plot development throughout the rest of the story, is that he's dealing with the death of the loved one. And so
John Wick. It happens a lot.
But so they fridged the dog in John Wick, though.
they fridged his wife too.
Yeah, but they fridged the dog. That was the thing I noticed with John Wick. Was I was watching that, I go, I expected the wife to happen, but then they killed the dog, and I went, they fridged the dog.
You didn't fridge the dog. Was it a female dog?
Fucking fridges the dog. But then again, I thought about it, and it's like, well, it's that was the problem with the early Punisher.
It's often his wife and child, right? So the dog was his kid. They fridged kids for male heroes a lot.
Well, they do that. Yeah, I mean that's the whole impetus behind and why the first few attempts at the Punisher movies are so bad, is because they made such a big deal about the death of the wife and the family as being the thing that motivates him.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that true in the comics too?
Yeah, I mean that's
based on. Yeah.
Yeah. So. I mean, that's part of the problem with the whole Punisher thing anyway, is that the whole thing is based on fridging.
So is the Crow.
Right. But at least in the Crow, he dies too. He also
gets fridged.
Right. They fridge them both. And he comes back to take revenge. So, I mean, that one is not so bad because it's, there's I mean, in order for the Crow to happen, he has to die too.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Right. Yeah. He gets put in the same fridge.
So
there are gradations. There are lots of gradations.
I think that one avoids really falling into the fridging trope because it's not, he's a hero who then has someone taken away from him and he goes on his journey.
He has himself and his loved one taken away from him both.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's not only avenging his loved one's death, he's avenging his own.
His own, yeah.
So it doesn't quite fall.
So goth. Oh,
I know, isn't it?
Dude.
And I suppose the one thing that saves the Deadpool situation is that he does go back and reverse it. So considering the psychosis that Deadpool lives under to begin with, I don't know that even though, they killed the girlfriend, he goes through this thing and then travels back in time and whole spoilers and revives the girlfriend.
Revives her, yeah.
I don't know that really signifies using her death as an emotional progression, because really Deadpool doesn't quite emotionally progress. He's just psychotic.
I don't know he ever does. Yeah, I don't know that he has the capacity.
So I mean, you could
Well, I just brought that up because of the fact that the creators were like, didn't even know they had done that. They really didn't understand.
They didn't even know they'd brushed up against it, which I think was the problem. But,
right.
So
I think that most of the time,
I think sometimes
there are probably a few assholes, especially in Hollywood. I would imagine so. But I think most of the time, it's just misogyny is so ingrained in all of us that people just don't notice it, especially when they're creating a strong character. You create a strong character and you don't notice. You're like, oh, what? Why is that bad?
Right.
She's totally badass. Well, yeah, not totally. But I think that like a lot of the time, this is why I'm writing these, is that it's just like, hey, this is something that, like for the Marion in the Indiana Jones thing, for me, this always bugged me and I had no idea why. I really didn't know why. because it was so normal for me to see the male hero go save the chick.
Right.
And the fact that she was a strong chick was cool. So I didn't really get it until I started to sit down and write about it and go, you know what? Oh, I see what just happened. It's almost like I didn't even notice that she was a damsel in distress because that was so normal in my entertainment world. Especially, growing up, at our advanced age, growing up with the rom-coms of the 80s and early 90s. I mean, goodness, right? Like some of the stuff is just so normal, even in my own brain. It's just like, wow, I didn't even notice that.
To quote my little sister, Jen, all our faves are problematic.
Yes. Oh, I know. I hope you have me as a guest on that one once or twice.
All our faves are problematic. Indiana Jones, 16 Candles, Pretty in Pink,
especially that.
The Breakfast Club.
I'm so Ducky.
That's all so problematic.
Ducky is my life.
And that's kind of another thing I would like to ask you about while we're here in the first episode with the Marion effect, is that there are some times when I see these things called out, where people come up with these new tropes like you have done. And there's a part of me that wants to ask, like, aren't you stretching that just a little bit? I mean, I'm aware of things, not you in particular, but oftentimes, it's like with the controversy over the fridging thing with Deadpool and some of the other stuff. It's like, how much of this is really there, or is this just, internet culture and this kind of, we do have this tendency, particularly I think in the last 20 years in this culture, to want to be a victim of something.
Oh, right.
I mean, and this is not to attempt to lessen the very obvious victimization of people of color, of minorities, of the LGBTQ community and things like this, who have legitimately been victimized, have been abused, murdered, killed, ostracized, cut off, discriminated against. But
I think what Me Too has been giving us is that's actually been happening to women.
Right.
The whole yes, all women thing too, is that's actually been happening to all women too for a long time now. And so pointing this stuff out is kind of rampant now, but at the same time, it's like, no, this is actually happening though. It's actually damaging.
Right. So how do we know the difference between why is, see if I can phrase this the way I want to, because what I'm getting at is that, there are times when people come out with things like this where I go, yes, I agree, that is a thing. And then there are some times where people come out and my response is, really?
Yeah. Oh, really? Totally. It was interesting. I was listening to this podcast called Pivot. It's Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher, but Galloway was talking to a guest speaker, and they were talking about the sort of outrage culture that's happening on campuses right now.
Why are you picking on people with big toes?
And it's just like, well, yeah,
big toe.
Just like
I'm talking about the third toe being really big. Oh, okay.
And so just like the fact that you are offended means that you need to be listened to and that you are right.
Right.
And just the need to be like the whole safe space thing, the whole trigger warning thing, like the difference between what is actually going to harm you and what is just a matter of, I need attention because and the only way I know how to do that is to be outraged.
Right.
And so that's why all of these are really hard. Like there are some things where it is like, there is a huge spectrum of the outrage culture and then bleeding over into this is a problem and it's been a problem for a long time and it's damaging.
Right.
So it's like, it's hard. Sometimes it's hard, especially when you're in a position where you don't see this stuff every day necessarily. So like if you're in a position of any kind of like economic race, any kind of privilege,
right,
where you're like, I don't understand. So either you don't understand because you're like, you're being a stupid idiot that's not actually a problem. And that's actually true. That can happen a lot. Like I was listening to this podcast and it's like, yes, if you get sexually harassed in your workplace, okay, that is a huge problem. But let's make sure that there's actually a problem. So there's this huge, which is good. And so the Me Too thing is good in a lot of ways, because it means that a lot of this stuff that's normal. I've been talking about like how like rape culture is so normalized.
Oh yeah.
We don't even notice it a lot of the time now. And now that Me Too has happened, now we're starting to notice it a lot more.
Right.
But noticing a lot more also means that we're noticing a lot more. So it can also mean that there's some things that are bullshit.
Right. You're going to have those situations like the one with Aziz Ansari, which
right.
is
I was just thinking about that. Yeah.
It's okay.
That just sounded like a bad date.
Right. I mean, yes, he was an asshole, but he wasn't exactly a rapey asshole.
And then there's the other argument, which would come back to us, which is like, but you weren't there. You didn't feel those feelings of pressure. You don't understand what it's like to be a woman in that situation.
Exactly.
Which is true. And
he did not continually get consent.
Right.
And of course, and she relied too much on innuendo to stand in for no.
Right. Well, and that's been something. And again, like what we're talking about, what is so ingrained.
Right.
There's been the whole talk this past, because it's just recently, we're recently out of the holiday season. We're talking about the song, Baby It's Cold Outside. There's all the dialogue about it.
Right.
And it's like, okay, historical context. Okay, what were the running jokes back then? Right. Okay, what was the misogyny like back then?
Right.
Okay, what does this song sound like to us right now in 2018, 2019 years? Okay, what? So there's a lot of stuff to talk about, and it's So it's the sort of it's the push and pull between outrage culture, and rape culture, I think.
Yeah, and bad communication does not necessarily default to rape.
Right.
It's
and a badly written character does not necessarily mean misogyny, but that's how it ends up sometimes.
Right.
Like it's like the Marion character, the maid Marion character. That's just a shitty movie. That whole movie is really badly written. There's all kinds of bullshit in that movie.
Yeah.
So, and that's just one of many really crappily written things. But
Raiders of the Lost Ark is a good movie. And her descent into being a damsel in distress, although problematic, is not illogical.
It's not illogical. I don't know what you mean by illogical.
It's not problematic, but it's not illogical. Maid Marian in the Robin Hood movies, her descent into damsel in distress is illogical because
there's no reason for it. Oh, I see.
There's no reason for it. Whereas Marion Ravenwood, character-wise, it's weak, it's flimsy, but there's a reason for her descent into being the damsel in distress.
She does try to use her particular strengths.
Right.
And
but they get
fail.
Thwarted because,
and so she has no strengths left because she used her strengths.
Because the bad guy is a good bad guy. And he's able to thwart her plan to drink him under the table because he can't be drunk under the table. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not that.
So I see what you're saying. It's like there's no like for the first Marion, it's like that makes zero sense.
Right. It's like,
and for the second Marion, it's
happened?
Like, well, it's kind of she ends up being an object, which is not okay. But you can see how that character was written.
Right. There's even though it's not good, it's a rational explanation. You can kind of rationalize her descent into being the helpless victim.
And you can see how the effects, how the echoes of our culture are there too. I mean, it's just like it's sort of ostentatious and ridiculous in the Maid Marian one, but you can just see it sort of reverberating a little bit more realistically in the Marion Ravenwood. It's like, oh, well, that's just where women are supposed to be.
Right, which maybe makes, even though it's better written and more logical and more rational, makes Marion Ravenwood the more insidious example.
Exactly, because it's less obvious.
Right.
Because you don't like me, even me.
Well,
you
that's
don't notice
scary
it.
and frightening, isn't it?
Boo.
I mean...
Now, on the other hand, I also don't want to be like, I don't want to go replacing all of our awesome male heroes with women either, for no reason, anyway.
Well, yeah.
Like, I hear that on Broadway recently, they did a revival of Glengarry Glen Ross with an all-female cast.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, wait, but the whole point, no.
But women wouldn't act that way.
That's not the whole point of Glengarry Glen Ross.
Right.
Is the male, that's not, no, you don't put women in that play to make it okay.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You're completely not even noticing what the play is about. So
right.
Stuff like that. Like, I don't want to just go ahead and, I mean, I like the female Doctor Who. I haven't seen any episodes of her, but I like the clips I've seen of her. It's fine. It's whatever, you know. But I don't want to go like replacing all of the male heroes with women. That's not the solution either. The solution is, how can we have male characters and female characters that are less problematic? How can we have our female characters less completely subservient to the male characters?
Right. How can they be co-equal badasses?
Co-equal badasses. Even if they're not the protagonist, well, A, we should make them protagonists more often than we do.
True.
And B, how can we make them at least, like you said, co-equal badasses? Even if they're a pivotal character or a sidekick or something, can we not make them subservient? Can we not make them less than the male? Can we not make them fall into all of these sort of misogynist tropes that happen?
Right.
So yeah. And the Marion Ravenwood one, like you said, is scarier because you don't notice it.
Well, here's an interesting question. Would Marion Ravenwood's descent into being the damsel in distress been more palatable if the bad guy had been a woman?
I don't know.
Or would that have then also then perpetuated kind of the gender issue, because you would have... If she's strong, she
has to be a villain.
If she's stronger than your good guy badass female, then she can only be defeated by a man?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I kind of talk about that in my last one.
Okay, yeah. See, I read your stuff.
It's more so.
Well in advance of talking to you, I read your stuff.
I'm so glad you're prepared, Jason Malott. So good. Well, I mean, the last one it's more centered on sex in particular as a power, but that's kind of what it's talking about like if she is more powerful than the male hero, she has to be a villain.
I'm only here for my vagina.
Yeah, I'm only here for my vagina. But it's the dynamic of, if she is equal in power and being in badassery, she either loses that to become a love interest, or she's a villain and has to be defeated that way. But either way, her power is defeated by the male hero. He's the only one who can do that. There's a subtrope of that one called "Oops, I'm not gay after all."
Oh, there is. That's not on here. I didn't catch that one. So that was the Marion effect. And next week we're going to talk about the Wonder Woman. That'll be our problematic badass female trope number 2.
Indeed.
Or our problematic badass lady part number 2.
Problematic badass lady part 2.
Part 2. So any last words before we let the audience go?
I just want to remind the listeners that we're talking about badasses, and we're opening your eyes.
Yes.
We're pulling the wool off of your eyes.
And if they want to read the articles, they're available at writershq.co.uk, and we'll have links in the show notes.
Yes. So they have a whole archive of all 7 of them that you can read one at a time.
And follow along and send us nasty notes. Because,
totally do.
Say goodbye.
Bye.
The Outrider Podcast is recorded by me, Jason Quinn Malott, and cleaned up by my badass producer, Heather Ann Eden. The songs Choose an Adventure and Break and Mend used in this series are by Wichita-based band Cartwheel off their new EP, Best Days, and are used by permission of the copyright holder, Kristen Chapman. You can get Cartwheel's EP on Apple Music and Spotify, so visit them at www.cartwheel.band.